Dipnetting with Dad. I had a big adventure when I went dip net fishing with Dad and Grandpa. I had been waiting forever, but finally I was old enough. My big sister had so much fun when she caught her first fish. I was so happy that it was my turn. Our people have fished that canyon since the beginning of time, Dad told me as we got ready to go. We packed a net and a pole for catching fish, sacks for carrying them, string for repairing the net, a rope to keep us from falling in the river, and snacks and drinks for when we got hungry. The net had to be checked very carefully and every old patch before we could go. It took a long time, but it was worth it. A good, strong net will not rip or break, Dad explained. That can make the difference between catching a lot of salmon or just a few. Before we left to Grandpa's sweat lodge, we had a traditional ceremony just for the occasion. Grandpa led the prayers and the song. I was still learning the words, but I splashed the hot rocks and sang my heart out. Hey-ya, hey-ya, hey-yo, I bellowed to the beat of Grandpa's drum. We were feeling stronger than ever in no time. Soon we were on our way. The bumpy gravel road to the river snaked left, then it snaked right. Everywhere I looked, there were rolling hills and grasslands. Grandpa told stories to pass the time. The river is no place to play around, he warned. It is fast and strong, and it doesn't forgive when we have to show our respect. When we got to the river, we went straight to the bridge and looked down at the people fishing below. Dad called it taking a looky-loo. We saw lots of fish in the back eddy by the bridge, and we could hear the river splashing and crashing below. Butterflies fluttered in my stomach as we unloaded the truck, but I didn't say a word. I stayed close to Dad as we hiked down the crooked goat trail that led to the river. Our families has used this trail for generations, my dad told me. When we got to the bottom, Dad tied me to a hook that was bolted to the rock, so that if I slipped, I wouldn't fall into the water. He tied up my rope with a double knot and made us both feel safe. Grandpa made an offering of tobacco to the Creator, and then we were ready to start. Dad went down first, lowering his net into the ice-cold river. Then slap, slap, he started scooping out fish and dropping them into the pit. The sockeye were so strong, they flipped and flopped, but they couldn't get out over the rocks that lined the sturdy wall pit. They were so slimy. Let's start sacking up these fish, Grandpa bellowed over the roaring river. I held the sack open and counted the fish as he gripped each one by the gills and slid them into the sack. It was very tricky because the fish were so slimy. He stopped at 10. The trick is to keep the sack light by not putting in too many fish, Grandpa said. That way we could make more trips and not get tired. I am not as young as I used to be. He made a funny face and we both laughed. Then Dad said, "Son, are you ready?" My heart beat as fast as Dad showed me how to stand on the rock wall. He told me how to hold the net and where to dip. "Watch closely," he said, "and you will see them coming up the river. They swim close to the rocks to get out of the current." I dipped once, twice, 3 times. I dipped and dipped, but I couldn't see any fish. I started to think there were none left. Suddenly, bump! Something hit my net. I could barely hold on. I pulled up with every ounce of strength I had. My first salmon. Dad helped me get the fish into the pit. Slap, slap, slap. I was grinning from ear to ear, but I didn't stop. I dipped my net right back into the water. Bump, bump, bump. Dad and Grandpa hooted and hollered as many more fish filled my net. I was catching fish faster than they could fill the sacks. After a while, Dad raised his hand. "Whoa, that's enough. Don't forget we have to carry these fish back to the truck." Grandpa agreed. "I am tired. You are working me too hard, grandson." He pulled out the bannock and juice and we had a good rest. We were all very hungry and thirsty. Finally, it was time to go back up the trail. I was so tired I could barely lift my feet. "You caught a lot of fish today, son, and that's pretty darn good for a first-timer. But you should rest now. We still have a lot of work to do." I slept all the way home. Mom and Grandma and my sister were all waiting in the yard when we got home. "The fun part is over now," Dad said with a wink. "Everyone eats, everyone chips in," said Grandpa. Grandpa was in charge. We all took up our positions. The first station was for gutting, the second for washing, and the third for getting the fish ready for freezing and drying. My job was washing the fish. Dried fish was my favorite, and Grandma's was the best in the territory. She cut so fast, and she was extra careful. People came from all over to ask Grandma how she dried her fish, but she just laughed and told them to let her get back to work. Even the neighborhood kids came to ask if the fish were ready. Grandma chased them away with a broom. My sister and I laughed and laughed. Nobody bothered Grandma when she was cutting fish. When most of the cutting was done, Grandma told me I could prepare the fish I had caught. We started with the biggest one. She showed me where to slice, where to chop, and how to hold on to the slippery salmon. Let me tell you, the fish was slippery. Finally, all of my fish were sitting on the table in front of me, clean as a whistle. Grandma and I spiced them up just right with a little salt and a pinch of her secret ingredients. Then it was time to hang them on the drying rack. We took turns keeping the fire going. It needs to be smoky with no flames, Grandma said sternly. Flames will burn the fish, she reminded us. To give our fish that special taste, Grandma made sure we used cottonwood for the fire. Good thing Dad kept a lot of it. I was in charge of the fire on the last day. It smoked and smoked and smoked away. Soon I was sound asleep, dreaming about how my salmon was going to taste. All of a sudden my sister shook me awake. "Don't let Grandma catch you napping," she whispered in my ear. I shot up like a lightning bolt. Mom was carrying firewood to the fire. She smiled at me and winked for good measure. Finally it was time. The fish were done and mine looked especially tasty. I reached for a piece. But then I looked at Grandma to see if it was okay. She pretended to frown and cracked her best granny smile. Grandpa laughed so hard his belly jiggled. I took my fish down from the drying rack and gave them a great big smile. Then we all sat down together to eat our freshly dried sockeye salmon. Grandpa said there is nothing more rewarding than eating your own catch. He was so right. Everyone was so quiet when Dad told me, "Good job, my grown-up son." I felt so proud. The end.